Hello guys, welcome to Daddy Share Space and welcome to my channel. My name is Telly. So I'm revisiting the Festool router table. I figured out what happened with the OF 1400 and also I figured out how to install the OF 1010. So I'm going to go ahead and go over that real quickly. Right now I left off with installing the OF 2200. So let's go ahead and pull it out. We'll go ahead and put in the OF 1400. And then we'll conclude with the OF 1010. First and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and pop this plate out. And then from here, I'll take the screwdriver and make sure this is locked and unscrew it. Pull this up. Flip it over. So let me go ahead and get the power cord out. And again, as I went over in the previous video, you've got these thumb screws to unscrew the router. First, I'm going to go ahead and disengage the lift. So I'm going to lock this down. Disengage the lift. We'll take off these dogs that are holding the router to the plate. When I first looked at this, I thought it was more complicated than it actually is. So now that I've done it a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. It's not as intimidating as it was when I first looked at the box with all the parts. Probably one of the reasons why it took me so long to get around to actually doing this, among other things. Now we're going to go ahead and lift the router off. We'll sit it over here for now. I did remove the pin and the knob from that router. And we're going to take out the insert, the green insert, and we're going to go ahead and put the white insert, which is for the 1400, in place, so that you can see that properly. Alright, and then we're going to install. Now, what I discovered, the reason why the router wasn't going up as high, was I had one of these pillars, and the higher pillars engaged. So let's go ahead and just quickly put it back together. Lay this down. We're going to put the 1400 arrow part down. The thicker part of this bar is going to face down. We'll screw this in. We will drop it in there like this. Alright, we got it in place. And then the other thing we want to do is I'm going to depress the router and then I'm going to lock it. That's going to give me space to work here. I'm going to take this off and place it here. Alright, and then we'll go ahead. We can go ahead and put this down to capture the router, and then we can release that. So based upon this, let me just make sure I have it in the right position. Yeah, that's the lowest pin right there. Okay. So let's go ahead and put the dogs on. I'm going to put this one on right here. Screw it down. Remember, the flat portion is going to go on the router body. The rounded portion is going to go on the base plate of the router table. Snug it up. I'll turn this around so you can see it on the other side here. And we will place this on here like this. Now, one of the things you may want to do, or you definitely want to do with this, is you want to actually put the dust collection on this, in this position, so that you can access that. Otherwise the dust is just going to go everywhere. So we'll put this one over here like this. Tighten that down. Let me grab my dust collection or the shroud for that and install it now before I flip the router over. Okay. So I'm going to pop this in here. Like that. And then I'm going to lock this in. So we've got the dust collection in place. And then the holes go towards me. So I'm going to flip the router over. So of course I would plug in my plug-in cord here. And then actually with this, I'll go ahead and test the router table out, because I have not tested this. Even though I bought it a while ago, I have not used the table. So it's just been sitting. So let's go ahead and plug this in, waiting for me to get around to it. So we got that plugged in. Let's go ahead and flip it over. Let's take this off. I'm going to drop the cord down, and I'll plug that in here shortly. Let's flip this over. And watch your cord. And we'll drop that in place. We'll snug up the top. That's locked in there. We'll take the power cord and plug it in. And then now I'll take the router table and plug that in. And then with that all on, now I need to make sure this is off. And then I want to activate the router underneath the table. It's locked on. Let's raise it up a bit so you can see the bit, or the collet. And as you can see, now it's all the way up here to the top. Make sure that's not going to just fly off and hit me in the face. Let's give it a shot. So I had to go ahead and take a break from installing the router because I ended up discovering some disappointing news. So it is confirmed, any Festool router made after 2021 is not compatible with this Festool CMS OF table, which is disappointing. Just being transparent, if I would have known that, I would not have spent my money on this table. So I cannot in good conscience recommend this table to anyone. That being said, at least in the short term, I'm going to work around the issues. Now, the issue that this has is what I found out after I bought the table, but I'm just now confirming now, is that the power switch on this particular device, number one, it does not support the OF2200. It's not wired for that. But number two, the safety mechanisms built into the OF1400 and the OF1010 manufactured after 2021 are no longer compatible. And let me see if I can explain it like this. Basically, if you plug a power tool into the wall, an old power tool, and let's say it has a trigger that can be locked on, if that power tool was to be yanked out of the wall, the power tool will obviously stop because there's no current going to the tool. However, in tools manufactured before a certain time, if you would take that tool and plug it back into the wall, that tool would still be running, which is a safety hazard. So what manufacturers have done is they built in safety into these tools to where now if there's ever a disconnect of power and you plug that tool back in inadvertently, you have to recycle the tool in order for it to work again. So I believe that's what's going on with this router table. This router table requires the router to be on at all times and for it to be actuated, meaning the current to the machine would be turned off and on with the power switch, which is located on this side over here. Now I was able to get it running, meaning like when I first plugged it in, no power. But then when I was finagling with it a bit, reaching under the bottom, activating the trigger, pushing down the power, the hold switch, the switch that holds the power button on, eventually I did get it to work. And what I did is I turned it off and then I cycled it back on and it came on. I turned it off again, I cycled it back on, it came on. When I did it the third time, it didn't come on. And another thing I noticed too, there's like a safety mechanism in the router because I can't consistently get it to activate the router from the power button. And there's a whole lot of unplugging, plugging in, unplugging, plugging in. Now just to make sure there was nothing wrong with my router, I just plugged the router directly into the wall, reached underneath and activated the tool. Works with no problem. So that will be very cumbersome, to be quite honest. However, probably not as cumbersome as it would be for someone that owned this table with the older router, or also probably not as cumbersome as someone that's used to using a different type of router setup, a different router table. For me, it's not as bad, only because even my little Ryobi router table that I have here in the shop, the power switch is very finicky. And so oftentimes when I would go to use that particular router, I would have to reach under and activate the router in order for it to work. And I just kind of stopped using the power switch because it seems to be kind of faulty. So even though I spent a lot more money for this particular router table, and it does have some, nicer features, it's got the slide table and so on and so forth, I'm gonna have to use that old school method to use it. Now with that being said, that's okay. Of course it's gonna have to be okay because I spent my money and that's what I have here in my shop. So I'll make the best use of it as I possibly can. So let me reiterate, if you're looking at buying one of these tables, consider that. I probably wouldn't do it now, or I wouldn't do it again. I've already done it, but I probably wouldn't do it again. And if I was a person that had not bought that or bought this table, I think that that information needs to be disseminated, unless you're just a tool collector, meaning like you just want to collect the different stages of a tool, whether it's functioning or not. I definitely, can't emphasize enough, I would not buy this table. As a matter of fact, I saw a post, I'm in California, someone in Seattle is selling a CMS table, but they have the table saw insert, they've got the side table, $2,200 for that. Now they're selling it with a TS75, but there again, you may end up running into the same problem if let's say the new TS75 has that safety feature built in, then it would only run, I would imagine, with the older TS75, which means that you would have to reach under and activate the saw every single time, which obviously is a pain and possibly a safety hazard. So even though it would have been cool to have, you know, these types of tables and this type of setup in your shop, it is probably not the most convenient thing. Now, I also have to consider the fact that, let's say I bought a woodpecker's router table or a Jessam router table. I would be curious to know which routers don't have that safety feature. Meaning, like if I was to buy a Makita router, if I was to buy a, you know, whether it be a DeWalt router or any of these other routers, would they have the ability to turn off and on with the button? And if so, what is the mechanism that allows that? Because I would think it would still be unsafe if I plugged any one of those routers into the wall and then unplugged it and plugged it back in. If it wasn't working, you know, or if it just, the router just kept running, then that would still present the same safety hazard. Now, so what that makes me think is there would have to be some kind of a technology built into your router table, into the switch, that actually communicates directly to the tool to let it know what it's plugged into and let it know that it's safe to operate under certain conditions in that method. So like a way to bypass it. I'm not gonna, you know, try to scour the internet and see if I can find or source a router of 1400 or 1010 that was made before 2021, because, you know, I don't know how much more lifespan would that router have. Also too, if I don't have the capability to open that router up and replace or repair anything inside of that router, then it would be pretty much a wasted effort. You know, Festool offers support and repair and parts for 10 years. So, you know, even if you got one that was made in 2020, it's 2025, at best you've got 5 years worth of coverage to keep that router up and going. And I don't even know if there's any financial incentive for Festool to continue to go back and help repair those routers. And obviously if you use your 2200 in a router table like this, and they find out that you use the CMS and that caused damage, whether it be to the CMS or the router table, that's not covered under warranty. They don't even offer parts for that. So that being said, I'm already here. This is like the interval. I had to actually step away. I started recording this video yesterday, and when I discovered that this didn't work, I was a bit disappointed, to be obvious, or obviously. And so, but the show must go on. So as I started in the video, I figured out how to install the 1400. Now I'm going to go ahead and walk through installing the 1010. So I'm going to pivot and use this video as a different type of concept. What I wanted it to be was a video where I was talking about how, you know, the benefits of the Festool system and so on and so forth. And though it does still have its benefits, this is one of the things, like when a product is eventually abandoned, where it's a bit more challenging. However, where I do see the benefit is, it would be nice if other tool companies and tool brands would kind of integrate this whole type of thing. I've heard multiple reasons why the CMS was discontinued here in the United States. One of them being that for the track saw and the jigsaw operations, where you would have your jigsaw mounted on the bottom sticking up, obviously that's a safety issue. You have no ability to really put guards on here with this type of top. Same thing with the track saw. So maybe that could be a reason why they decided, hey, we don't want that going on here, where you have these safety issues. You know, my table saws, they all come with, like, you know, some kind of guard or something on the top. And even though I've seen DIYers on YouTube mount a jigsaw upside down and use that exposed blade, I haven't seen too many products sold on the market that utilize that same feature. So let me just go ahead and install the 1010, just so anyone that's interested in knowing about that, or anyone that still would push past and buy this Festool router table simply because they wanted to have a Festool router table in their shop. For myself personally, did I buy this just because it was a Festool router table? Yes and no. I bought it in ignorance, meaning like I didn't really understand the limitations. That's number one. But I also am somewhat of a completionist. I like things to match. I like things to be within a system. It gives you a little bit more of a warm feeling to know that things are going to work together, albeit in this situation that's not the case. But the other thing is too, when I was looking at other solutions, like say buying a woodpecker's setup or a Jessam setup, those could be pretty pricey as well. And then you always have to kind of consider, you know, what's going to work with what type of router, what type of brand. I went through a lot of personal thought when I was thinking that I would buy a router table, because I knew I wanted to get a real router table in my shop. But when I thought about that, I was like, okay, maybe I'll get a router table and I'll buy like the big Makita router and mount it under there, because you don't see it. Once you put a router in a router table, you don't see it anymore, right? So what does it matter which router it is? This was just a solution that I thought would work better for me, or be a little bit more useful to me. And so that's why I went this way. And when I watched some older videos, because if you think about it, a lot of times people don't communicate all the way through. What do I mean by that? You may find in some forum down in the thread that this doesn't work, and if you search directly for that term, you may, you know, that thread may surface. But if you go and find any content on this particular router table, a lot of it is outdated. You know, like even this video of me installing the routers, there's like a handful of those videos on YouTube. I personally was not able to find one that shows the install of the 1010. And so, you know, you're kind of stuck in that time and that era when the hype was real, when influencers and people just bought it and they were excited about their purchase. That's all the data you get. And so if you do come across a product like this, you may get, you know, the butterflies in your stomach and feel like, oh, let me go ahead and pull the trigger on that. And, you know, I've just learned with this purchase that I have to do a lot more of my due diligence, is search a little bit deeper to find out what are the pros and the cons, and maybe I should look a little bit longer. Tying that into something else that just pops into my head, my shop vacs, or the Festool ones. I was on the fence about buying the new Festool CT36 as opposed to the old one, simply because for the same concept. It's like, I understand how my CT48 auto clean works with the dial and so on and so forth, and with the module. I didn't know what kind of changes were going to be presented, because a manufacturer is not going to tell you that up front. What are going to be the negative drawbacks to moving on to the newer technology? Whereas, you know, the new Festool CT36, the CT48, all of them, they have a full digital panel, right? For as digital as it is. Basically, it's got soft touch buttons as opposed to the dial. And of course, any drawbacks, any setbacks, that's not going to be reported until a later date. And that's typically going to come from people like myself, from customers that actually purchase something and then they end up finding out, yeah, there's these pros, but then there's these cons over here. That's typically not going to be highlighted by a manufacturer, because obviously that's going to drive away sales. You know, people that are really connected to the older way things work, and don't want to just move with the times, they're not going to be as open to basically saying, hey, I don't want to, they just don't want to move forward. And it's understandable, because as you can see, especially in today's current environment, all companies, it doesn't matter what type of company, they want us to move forward with their technology because they need to continue to produce revenue. It's becoming less and less important for a company to sell you a product that's going to last decades than it is for them to sell you like a subscription or something that's going to fail in half or a quarter of the time for even more money than you paid for something that lasts decades, so that they can continue to boost their revenue. That's just, you know, that's companies, that's business. We can call that evil, we can call it whatever we want to call it. It's just a fact, you know. I know when I go to my job every day, I'm hoping that there's a job available for me. I'm hoping that I'm going to make my wage, and I'm also hoping that over a span of time that my wage is going to go up. And so in that same concept, companies want to pay their employees, they want their revenue to grow, and sometimes it's by any means necessary. Anyways, that's totally a different side topic. Let me go ahead and wrap this video up by removing the 1400, putting in the 1010, and then yeah, that'll probably, the only time you'll probably see this in any future videos is if I'm actually using it on a product, or sorry, if I'm using it on a project. Other than that, I don't think I really have much else to say. You know, I did consider the possibility of if I could put a different router lift in here, you know, like maybe a JESM or something, so that I could switch out and go to a different type of router. However, that would require a lot of machining. I would probably have to cut out a spot to set the plate in, which is not an impossible task. I'd have to remove this thing here, the lift, and who knows, maybe that may be something, a modification that I might consider in the future, because if the inconvenience of having to reach under to turn the router on every time starts to outweigh, you know, the slide table and all of that, then either A, I could put this up for sale myself. However, I would feel a bit guilty selling this to someone else unless I just knew that they were a collector and they were willing to pay, I'm not even gonna front, what I paid for it, right? Because at least today, right now, I'm not willing to take a deficit, even though this didn't work out for me. But at the same time, I also wouldn't feel comfortable misleading the next person and trying to make them, or not informing them that this may not work out for them. So I would either just set on it, or possibly get to the point to where I just do some real serious DIY, as I said, cut out an area, totally redesign this to where it would work with a different router. That's an idea. That's an idea. Anyways, guys, let's go ahead and change the router table. Change the router. So let's take this out. Let's go ahead and we're going to release the cams. And I think before I actually take this out, what I'm going to do is show you what I found out about the 1010 and how it installs on this table. So I'm going to turn it upside down like this. Let's see if you're actually able to see what I'm looking at here. Maybe zoom this camera in a little bit. And I have a kit here that I bought on Amazon, and it has several these kind of like Torx type bits in it, or wrenches. And what I found is this one right here. This is the, it says S2T10, so a T10, Torx 10, and it fits into these holes. Now, what I read online, it said that you can use the flathead or a Torx, and it is designed like that. That's why I was kind of confused about what this was all about, or how this works. So essentially, I'm going to stick this in here, and I'm going to unscrew all of the screws here on top of this device. Now, obviously, if I had a Torx 10 bit for my drill, it would be a lot faster process. Let me pick that screw up that I dropped before I lose it permanently. I'm going to set that there, and I'm going to try to put these in the same order that I took them out. I'm going to set them here on the table so I kind of understand exactly where they all go. And hopefully I don't knock them off the table and lose them. This would be the perfect time to have one of those magnetic trays to hold all the screws. So overall, I will say that I'm a bit disappointed that this didn't work out the way that I would have liked. It was a nice amount of money that I spent on this only to find this out, but you live and you learn. I am thinking about like different things that I could have purchased instead to advance my shop, as opposed to going down this particular pathway. But I'd still consider this to be an upgrade over my Ryobi table, simply because obviously the Ryobi table is it has the same problem as far as being able to turn on. So now I'm going to lift this plate off. You can see that there. I'll set that. Fits like this. I'll set this like this. And then now you have this ring on the inside here. I'm going to take this off. And I'll take off the last ring. And then we'll pull this plastic component out, which you can see there. And then once I get that out, that allows me to take this piece here that I said fits inside, and this is going to face down. So when I look here, there's a slot. Let's see if you can see that right there, where it fits, and you see it can spin back and forth, just a little play there. So that's how that fits down more flush into the router. So now what we'll do, without further ado, we're going to take the router, set it back over here. We're going to lift out the router table, turn it over. We're going to, let's go ahead and disengage this portion here, the lift. Let's lock the router first in place. Disengage the spindle. Now, if I had a lot more space, I would simply, and cash at this time, I would simply pivot and buy like a woodpecker or a Jessam table with, you know, the nice bells and features, and just get a, you know, like a Makita, probably a big Makita router, and put it in there and use that as my router table. That still may be something that I'll do in the future, but for right now, the wound is still pretty raw purchasing this system here, and so I'm gonna give this some time and see if there's other ways to work around this challenge. Alright, so I'm gonna lift this up, and then I'm gonna disconnect the power cord. Now, when I bought this table, and what I was planning on saying about this is how I wish that other companies would integrate tools like Festool has with, you know, I've got a couple of complaints, or comments, not complaints, comments about this table and the system. Basically people saying, like, one person saying, you know, that's why it's not available, it was too cumbersome. And then another person saying that, you know, similar concept, that it's overly complicated for what it is. And I do agree with both of those statements in one aspect, but it's kind of like if you want something that is like a Swiss Army knife or a jack of all trades, it's going to come with some trade-offs, you know. Like if you just had a regular sleek knife, it's going to do everything that you want it to do as far as cutting, and it's going to work well in that function. But then when you compare that to like a Swiss Army knife that has all these different things and tools that come off of it, it may not be the best knife, but it has way more capability than a straight up knife. And so that's how I would compare this system, because when we look at this system, we look at it as a router table, but it was not designed and built to just be a router table. It was designed and built to be a modular system to house the track saw, the jigsaw, and the router table. And in theory, you could just buy the plates and swap them out and get different types of functionality from the same table. Or you could have a similar design philosophy in your shop by having all three of these tables and modules and utilizing it to where if using a jigsaw, it'd be like having a bandsaw, but of course it's not a jigsaw. I mean, not a bandsaw, but having that ability to cut like you're cutting with a bandsaw, where you have your work on the table and move it through the work, but also having the ability of like obviously like a jigsaw, but like almost like a scroll saw, because obviously you disengage a scroll saw and you can put the blade through a circular opening and cut out from the center of a workpiece. If you have a jigsaw mounted upside down, you have the stability of a bandsaw per se, combined with the ability to cut through, like once you drill through your workpiece, you can set that over and cut out anything on the inside without having to cut from the outside. So that's a benefit. And then obviously if you didn't want to have a big table saw, you could use another modular system like this to use the track saw and use it as a faux table saw solution. So sometimes having a lot of options can be counterproductive. I mean, I think about my Festool multi-tool. I bought the set that has all the different components to it. I don't know if I'm going to ever use all those components, like the plunge base and so on and so forth, but it's cool to have. So let's go ahead and take the plate that's here off. And remember, with this one, this is the only one that's going to have the small part of the plate facing down. We got that there. And we're going to locate where it goes on the base right here. So, similar design language on all these routers. The fact that I could use the same component on all the routers is, in my opinion, a benefit versus having to, reinvent the wheel with everything that you buy. So I imagine this is going to go in like this, drop in here, and then we leave this metal bar in the same location that it's been in before. Let me just raise this camera up, or open up this aperture a bit. So as you can see here, we've got the metal bar still in the horizontal position, so it's going to actuate on here. So let's lower this down, lock it, and then let me take this back off because we want to put in the plate. So what we'll do, we'll pop this 1010 one out. As you can see here, we're going to replace it with this one. It's going to face down in this opening, and there is a key or a notch on there. So we'll pop that in there. Then now we take the router and we stick it down. It's going to go in that hole, and actually what I'm going to have to do with this is, I think I'm going to put it in here first, because remember, it also has to fit in here. I just want to see where those keyed opening is, because we want it to sit down in there properly. So let's try to match that up. Let's see what the easier way to do this is. Okay, if I put this in like this, and my notch is way over here, so it's going to go like this, based upon where the notch is. Notch is here. feel like that fits in there a little bit more. Let me just take this off for just a second. I want to see how much lower this goes in here. So I see that. So it seems like it goes like this. Okay, so that's how far over that needs to go to fit in there, but does it twist? So what I'm noticing, there are 3 areas here where these 3 levers can fit, and it doesn't seem to be lining up with where this is supposed to be keyed to go into the base plate, and then also where this pin is supposed to go down. Now I don't know if it matters. I'm just going to kind of brute force it on here and see what happens, because as I see the router's not level right now, but then like, okay, so this is probably as good as I'm gonna get it based upon what I can see. It appears to be fairly level, so let's just go ahead and lock it in and see how it functions on the other side. So we can go ahead and I'll wait to lower that. Let's bind the router to the machine. And we'll go and put this one right here. Let's make sure this is going to engage. And it is, albeit not like perfectly center. It's just kind of off to the side, but we'll see if it works. Get this all tightened up. Maybe this is the reason why I didn't see anybody installing this on YouTube, but I do remember it saying that this has the capability. Now it looks like you can actually just basically break those tabs off if you wanted to, if you had problems with this. There could be something that I'm missing as far as how this functions, but for now I have it snug in there. It's all tightened up. That's good. I'll release this. This out so it goes all the way down. Alright, so we're good there. Now we're going to take the power cord and plug it in. And we'll go ahead and flip this over. I'm going to put the back in first. Drop that in, and obviously this is the first one that I have where I actually have the bit on there. Now yeah, I see the tabs are not aligned, and they're actually, one of them is kind of bent there, so these tabs should be turned in a different way. So in order to kind of fit this in there the way, because I can see this is all the way up, and I think that if I try to put in one of these center rings, it's beveled up because those tabs are pushed up. So this is not installed properly. Somehow or another, this, I feel it pushed up all around here. So somehow where this is keyed to fit in the table versus these notches, they're not lining up. So I don't know if those notches need to be removed or what. So let me take that out before I break it. I'm trying to think of, I guess one of the things I could do is kind of file off that notch or this edge so that this can turn properly and fit in there, but then it won't be keyed as to where it's supposed to be. So anyways, but you see the general idea of how this installs into the router table. Obviously the 1010 is going to be for lighter duty applications. With the 2200 you can do anything you want to do in there, so I think it's better to have the heavier duty router in the table because you can do light tasks and heavy tasks, and having the 1010 out. So let's go ahead and take this out before those tabs snap off from pressure, and I think that will conclude this video. So at least I was able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, which is installing all three routers into the router table. Which we were successful at doing that. Let's lock this down. Let's go ahead and get the knob, which I dropped, and release this. Now, as I said before, this fits in here. If you look on the top area, there's a keyed portion right there. There's a keyed portion right here. But then this bottom portion has these three tabs, and the router, I don't know if you can see it in this camera, but basically those tabs would fit here, 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 and here, which does not coincide with the keyed portion and how the router is supposed to fit in the table, unless of course I have it completely backwards, which would basically mean, let's say, let me pull this out and try one more thing before I move on. As I'm turning these knobs, I get what you mean by the cumbersomeness of this, because these are some pretty long thumb screws and they are not coming out very quickly. Okay, so I see too, this little shroud, it fits within these grooves as well on this router. But yeah, if you look here, as I said before, you've got these markings here. Yeah. So you pretty much have a choice, right? Based upon what I'm seeing here, this needs to be like this. But these tabs right here do not fit. So the only thing that I could see is you would have to file this part down in order for this to spin freely, to line up, and for all of this to fit. I'm not sure if that's a design flaw or what, but the way that this fits on the bottom here is not lining up with the pinhole, this, and the base. So you know, even though in theory you can put it on there, I think what it's looking like, you would have to remove, either break these tabs off. That's one option. The other option would be to go without this pin. which I don't think that's what you want to do. So anyways, guys, I want to thank you guys for taking time to watch even a portion of this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Take care.